say that it's generally pretty accepted now within the accountancy sector that social media has an important role to play within any overall marketing mix. However, all too often, this activity is initiated without any clear sense of what it is that the firm is actually trying to achieve from that activity, or indeed how they're going to measure that performance. Now, social media is a very, very kind of broad spectrum of activity, but I would suggest that most of the benefits will fit within three main categories. The first of these, and probably the least quantifiable, but arguably the most important, is from a brand perspective. Now, increasingly, both customers and also employees of accountancy firms are really demanding that their firms show a more human side, that they operate in a more transparent way, that they really communicate, what they're all about, why they exist, why people should care, what their values are, etc. All that really, really important stuff. People are demanding that firms act in that transparent way. And I would suggest that there is no more effective set of channels through which to achieve those aims than via social media. Now, as I said, it's not necessarily the most easy to quantify. It may involve a degree of kind of qualitative feedback around what people make of the content, what they like, what they don't like. But of course, you can also look at things like reach and engagement and how people seem to be interacting with the brand via these channels. Now, the second category of benefit, which is far more quantifiable, is from a lead generation perspective. Now, this is very dependent on who your customers are. So it's going to be a little bit different for every accountancy firm, depending on the different kind of sectors and audiences that they're targeting. But if ultimately your audience is active on any of these channels and you are able to capture their data and initiate a relationship in a profitable manner, in other words, the cost of acquiring that data is less than the value of that data when you take into account customer lifetime value and conversion rates, then what you've got there is a really scalable, exciting route to market. So this is increasingly something that we're seeing within the accountancy sector. And as I say, very, very quantifiable. You can see exactly how much those leads are costing to generate, how that compares to their value, and of course how many you're generating and via which channels, etc. Now, the third category of benefit, and the one that I would suggest companies tend to think about the least, is the impact of social media on your other digital channels, in particular those that you own, which are your website and your email list. Now, the reason why this is so important is social media has one big flaw from a commercial perspective, and that's that you don't actually own those platforms. You are building on somebody else's land. So if Mark Zuckerberg contravenes some GDPR regulation and gets slapped on the wrist and suddenly the advertising is restricted on Facebook, you can't do anything about that. If LinkedIn decide to hike up the cost of advertising to a point where it's no longer viable for you, then all that energy that you've invested in building that asset is suddenly for nothing. If on Twitter perhaps you have an intern come in who types something a little bit silly and gets you into hot water and you have your account blocked, again, you can't do anything about it because you don't own any of these platforms, whereas you do own your website and your email list. So the more that you can use social media to fuel those two assets that are yours, the more value you're ultimately going to be taking in the long term from your social media presence. Now, as I said at the start, social media is a very broad thing and there are all sorts of benefits, and there's no question that every accountancy firm needs to have social media within its overall marketing and communications plan. But just make sure that you always begin by asking those two vital questions. What is it we're trying to achieve, and how are we going to measure that performance?